Yeah, all right. All right, y'all, I'm going to get started. If I could have your attention, please. Shh. It worked. That's how I hush my infant daughter. It's cool that it works on such a big crowd, too. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the National Press Club. I'm Andrea Edney. I'm an editor at Bloomberg News, and I am the 111th president of the National Press Club. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us here tonight. The National Press Club is the world's leading professional organization for journalists, and this is one of our most important nights of the year, because this is the night that we recognize an outstanding journalist, or journalists, with our highest honor, the Fourth Estate Award. This evening dates back to 1973, when our first honoree was Walter Cronkite of CBS News. And we have a clip of Mr. Cronkite talking about the first of these dinners and what happened there. Let's give it a listen and a look.
One of my more, I suppose, dramatic evenings at the National Press Club was the night that I was very proud to get the National Press Club Award. And I was making my speech from the throne, as it were, and I thought it was going quite well. In fact, I thought it was pretty good. And then suddenly, one of my auditors out there, one of the audience, got up and left, and a few moments later, another one got up and left from another part of the hall, and then I saw messages being passed and others leaving, and they were obviously something about my speech had disturbed them. They were just going to leave me alone, and they were leaving me alone. And finally, some kind soul got up and said, "You may not know what's happened because you're up there at your podium, but the President Nixon, has just fired Archibald Cox, the special counsel who was looking into and supposed to be investigating the Watergate affair." And they called it later the Saturday Night Massacre. And there was the president massacring, killing the investigation, but he sure as a devil had me up there on the noose as well. I was dying as my speech went out the window as the hall emptied. But of course, I myself was anxious then to get back to the CBS where I felt I might be needed. So my great speech from the throne sort of petered out.
So there you saw that our first Fourth Estate Award dinner coincided with what we now know as the Saturday Night Massacre, where 3 top Justice Department officials quit because the president had ordered them to fire Archibald Cox, the independent special prosecutor investigating a break-in at the Watergate Hotel, which some of you may have heard of. By Sunday, Archibald Cox had been fired and no longer had an office. He wanted to talk to the press. So he walked over here to the National Press Club, and we set up a room. A crowd filed in, there was a news conference, and there was a sense that the country could go on, even after the events of the previous evening. And that, in large part, is thanks to our free and independent press, and in large measure, due to the great papers we're honoring here tonight, which are themselves important institutions in a free society. Now, excuse me for just 1 second. Yep, okay. Nothing from Special Counsel Mueller. See how far we've come? There's more where that came from. Other past Fourth Estate winners include Wolf Blitzer, Gwen Eiffel, Andrea Mitchell, Bob Woodward, Jim Lehrer, Christiane Amanpour, and David Broder. We are also honored to have with us tonight Marvin Kalb, the moderator of the Kalb Report and our 2006 honoree. Marvin, will you please stand? This year's recipients are Washington Post executive editor Marty Baron and New York Times executive editor Dean Baquet. Marty and Dean are the 46th recipients of the award, and I cannot think of two more worthy people to receive this award this year. As editors of two of our country's most influential newspapers, both have risen to the challenges of our times and emerged as thought-provoking and pathfinding leaders. They are steadfast in their commitment to excellence in journalism and to the defense of a free press. We selected Marty and Dean together for tonight's award because of the competition between their two newspapers. So, everything each paper does to break the story, publish the biggest, most impactful story of the day, the month, the year, all while relentlessly pursuing clarity and accuracy. These are the stories that start the conversation every morning in our country and often set the course of events. Under the leadership of Marty Baron and Dean Baquet, that competition has made both newspapers stronger and better, and in doing so, strengthened journalism as a whole. We are joined tonight at the head table by, starting from my far right, Fred Ryan, publisher and CEO of the Washington Post. Kieran Murray, Washington bureau chief with Reuters. Walter Robinson, editor-at-large of the Boston Globe. Marty Baron, executive editor of the Washington Post. And Barbara Cochran, University of Missouri School of Journalism and president of the National Press Club Journalism Institute Board of Directors. And to my left, we have Dean Baquet, the executive editor of the New York Times. We have A.G. Sulzberger, publisher of the New York Times. Elizabeth Buemiller, bureau chief for the Times here in Washington. Megan Toohey, a reporter with the New York Times. And Chuck Plunkett, director of CU News Corps at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Welcome. Also, there are several past presidents of the National Press Club here tonight. Would all of you stand for a moment, please? Thank you, and I'd like to acknowledge also our National Press Club Board, the board of the National Press Club Journalism Institute, the Fourth Estate Awards Selection Committee, and the dinner committee led by Rob Stoddard. Could you all please stand for just a moment? We appreciate everything that all of you have done. Journalism is facing opposition as never before. not only from dictators in far-off lands where journalists face the most dangerous conditions, but also right here at home, where journalists are being criticized by our country's highest-ranking officials in a way that we have not ever seen. It's a call to all of us to stand up for the traditions of a free press and to continue reporting the facts so that the people, our citizens, can make informed decisions. This is something our Constitution protects and enshrines in the First Amendment. Today, I'd like to talk about a man who, even though he knew there were risks, cared about his homeland so much that he wanted to use his words and his experiences to make his country better. That country is Saudi Arabia, a nation that aggressively and violently opposes the free flow of information, and not just, as we now know, within its own borders. The man is Jamal Khashoggi. We now know that he was lured with assurances of safety to an embassy in Istanbul, a government building, a place of law, where he should have been safe, and instead, he was murdered. For what? To quiet him, to take away his voice, to oppress. Maybe to send a message to those who dare call attention to the truth. At the National Press Club, we have a tradition of honoring journalists who are at risk or who have paid an unthinkable price to fight for press freedom for all of us. This honor is known as the John P. Aubuchon Award. It is what we can do here to help keep a spotlight on important cases and help ensure that the words and spirit of honorees endure for all of us. We're going to hear more about this award and about tonight's recipients. All of their stories are important and instructive, but before we do one more thing tonight, we are declaring Jamal Khashoggi as a 2018 Aubuchon honoree. Please join me. Please also join me in welcoming Washington Post publisher Fred Ryan, who is going to accept the award for Jamal and his family. Fred.
Well, thank you, Andrea. And on behalf of Jamal's friends and colleagues at the Washington Post, I'm honored to accept this award. On an evening that celebrates great journalism and champions press freedom around the world, we appreciate the National Press Club for recognizing the work of Jamal Khashoggi. Jamal gave everything he had to journalism. He was singularly committed to the journalist's mission, which is to tell the truth. In particular, he told the world the truth about the Saudi government's oppression and brutality towards its people. This devotion to his work and to his country ultimately cost him his life. Jamal's murder is an urgent and powerful example of why we must stand up for freedom of the press around the world. The administration argues that we should tread lightly on Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in order to, quote, protect our interests in the region. With potential commercial deals at stake, President Trump wants us to look the other way when it comes to the murder of an innocent journalist. He's ignoring the findings of America's intelligence services and wants to continue as business as usual with Saudi Arabia as though this state-sponsored act of terror had never happened. But turning a blind eye to a brazen assault on press freedom is not protecting our interests. It is a betrayal of our interests. Business opportunities may come and go, but in the end, America's power is derived by America's principles. And abandoning those principles sends a dangerous signal to a volatile region. It delivers a message of appeasement to ruthless tyrants around the world. If those who commit terrorist acts against journalists get away with their crimes, it only invites more of the same. If the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia faces no consequences for Jamal's murder, every journalist in every country around the world may be at greater risk. Although President Trump has failed to stand up for America's values here, Congress can. They can insist on an honest accounting of what happened to Jamal. They can demand an independent, thorough investigation into this killing, no matter where it leads. And they can use their powers to impose true penalties on the regime that murdered Jamal. In the wake of this outrage, the investigative reporting in the Khashoggi case has shown the importance of truly great journalism and what it can do. Uncover facts that others would like to keep hidden, help deepen our understanding of the world, and hold even the most powerful to account. Well, it's so fitting that the National Press Club is bestowing the Fourth Estate Award on the leaders of two news organizations that have done such exceptional reporting on this heinous act and the efforts to cover it up. Both the Washington Post and the New York Times have done diligent and deep reporting to ensure that the world knows and does not forget Jamal's story. At the Washington Post, Jamal's murder is personal. He was a respected colleague and friend to many. The entire Post team has done everything possible to expose the truth, asking tough questions and relentlessly chasing down facts in order to bring crucial evidence to light. This excellent reporting reflects the leadership of Fourth Estate Award recipient Marty Baron. Marty is a journalist. He sets high standards and he sees the stories that others overlook. He asks questions that no one else thinks of and never lets an investigation rest until the public has the answers it deserves. I'm grateful to have him as a colleague and a friend, and so pleased to see him honored this evening. It's great. And it's great that Dean Baquet is also being honored this evening with the Fourth Estate Award. Under his leadership, the New York Times has done exemplary reporting on Jamal's murder, with one groundbreaking story after another on the Saudi government's cover-up. Their work is a testament to Dean's solid news judgment, his journalistic values, and his unwavering commitment to his profession. I have to say, it's great to see these two giants of journalism together at a friendly social gathering, because they are, as you know, fierce competitors. But I know for a fact that they genuinely like, respect, and admire each other. But you don't want to be near one of them when the other one has a big scoop. But most importantly, at a time when the press is being smeared as an enemy of the people, Marty and Dean are living counterexamples, trusted journalists of the utmost integrity, committed to public service. These men are servants of the people, and we are indeed fortunate to have them at the helm of these two important newsrooms. It's an honor to be in the company of such outstanding journalists, and thank you to the National Press Club and everyone here for your concern and support for Jamal and for your tireless advocacy on behalf of journalists around the world. Thank you.
Fred, thank you for these inspiring words. Thank you. Now to introduce our other Aubuchon winners and to tell us more about the National Press Club Journalism Institute is its board president, Barbara Cochran.
Andrea, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. So if you haven't gotten the message already, here's the nut graph. Freedom of the press, both abroad and at home, is the top priority of the National Press Club and its nonprofit arm, the Journalism Institute. It has to be. For yet another year, people and forces who see a free and independent press as a threat to their power are explicitly targeting journalists. We must call out this behavior, and we must not let the victims be forgotten. That is why it is so important to recognize Jamal Khashoggi, and it is why we are honoring the work of the other recipients of this year's Aubuchon Awards. Nor are these the only Free Press heroes we honor tonight. We think tonight of Jason Rezaian, the 2015 Aubuchon Award recipient. Jason spent 544 days in an Iranian prison before he was freed, thanks in large part to the work of many people in this room tonight, including the Washington Post, for whom he worked and works. And I'm happy to say that Jason is the newest member of the board of directors of the Journalism Institute and helps us keep our press freedom mission front and center. Sadly, not all cases we work on have had a happy ending. A 2016 Aubuchon Award recipient, the photojournalist known as Shah Khan, remains in an Egyptian prison after 5 years of arbitrary detention and for more than 2 months after Egyptian officials promised to free him. Al Jazeera, which is represented here tonight, also has a journalist who's been jailed in Egypt for nearly 2 years. I'd like us to show our support for our colleague in the prison in Egypt of Al Jazeera by recognizing Al Jazeera and asking them to please stand. Another case we've helped to shine a spotlight on is that of Austin Tice, a freelance journalist who was kidnapped in 2012 while covering the conflict in Syria. The U.S. government believes he is being held by the Syrian government or its allies. The FBI has offered a $1 million reward for information leading to his release. To support that effort, we have announced a night out for Austin Tice for May 2nd, 2019, in which restaurants in Washington, including the restaurants here at the Press Club and across the country, will donate a portion of their proceeds to raise another $1 million to add to the reward. Threats to a free and independent press don't happen only overseas. Especially here in Washington, we are conscious of the words and actions of officials that undercut and demean journalists and their work as somehow unpatriotic or disrespectful. The press's job is not to report things as positively as possible. It's to report things as truthfully as possible. So when the White House revoked the press pass of CNN correspondent Jim Acosta, we spoke out loudly and prepared to join in the legal action. Happily, the press pass was restored and the suit was dropped. Unhappily, the new rules for press conferences forbid follow-up questions, a ridiculous hindrance to effective reporting. We promise you we will follow up on the fight for press freedom here at home. And we're very pleased to have CNN represented here tonight. Will Bureau Chief Sam Feist and his other CNN colleagues please stand? Throughout the year, the leadership of the club and the Institute have worked tirelessly to secure the freedom of our 2017 Aubuchon recipient, Emilio Gutierrez Soto. Just 1 year ago, Emilio stood here and spoke so eloquently of the dangers he and other Mexican journalists face from government-sanctioned threats, violence, and even murder. Just a few months later, Emilio was detained by U.S. immigration authorities and held along with his son for 8 months. Thanks again to the efforts of many in this room, Emilio is now free and studying at the University of Michigan on a year-long Knight Wallace Professional Journalism Fellowship. But U.S. immigration authorities are still trying to deport him, and we are still fighting in court to win him permanent asylum. Our successes show how much difference all of us can make when we support our colleagues in need. And where our colleagues are still imprisoned or in danger, we must never, never stop fighting. Now it's time to present this year's Aubuchon Awards, named for a former president of the National Press Club who himself was a tireless fighter for press freedom. This year's international recipients are Wa Lone and Ja So-u, who are journalists for Reuters in Myanmar. There, they courageously investigated a massacre of 10 Rohingya Muslim men and boys and the involvement of Myanmar's military. The Myanmar government arrested the two journalists, but Reuters published their story anyway after they went to prison, where they have now been held for nearly a year. In September, the two were sentenced to 7 years imprisonment, a sentence that Reuters is appealing. For their courageous reporting in the face of extreme government punishment, we honor Wa Lone and Ja So-u and hope that they can join us here in person next year. In their place, Kieran Murray, the Washington bureau chief for Reuters, is here tonight to accept the award on their behalf. Kieran.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to collect this award this evening on behalf of Wa Lone and Ja So-u. And I'd like to thank the judges on their behalf. As many of you know, Wa Lone and Ja So-u have been in detention for almost a year now. At the time of their arrest in December 2017, they were working on an investigation into the murders of these 10 Rohingya Muslim men and boys in a small village in Rakhine State. They were essentially victims of a deliberate setup and a sham trial. In what has become a landmark press freedom case in their country, the court charged Wa Lone and Ja So-u under the colonial era Official Secrets Act, and in September they sentenced them to 7 years in prison. Reuters has been covering the crisis in Rakhine State since it began, and we will continue to offer independent and reliable reports of the crisis as it continues. We are proud at Reuters of our history of reporting around the world, and especially of our record of working with and hiring local journalists to tell the stories of their own countries. Wa Lone and Ja So-u are very much part of that tradition. They are journalists who perform a crucial role in shedding light on issues of global interest and in improving democracy in their own countries. They are great people and excellent colleagues and excellent journalists who are simply doing their jobs. Independent, unbiased reporting. That's why they're in prison. Simple as that. And we really appreciate all the expressions of support that we've received inside Myanmar and outside, and this evening for this award. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kieran, very much. We appreciate your being here and send our best wishes to you. Our U.S. recipient this year is Chuck Plunkett, a former editor at the Denver Post. In April, Plunkett was responsible for producing a special 6-page editorial section of the Post that took the extraordinary step of criticizing the paper's owners, a private equity company called Alden Global Capital. Plunkett resigned from the Denver Post on May 3rd after the paper tried to block him from publishing another editorial criticizing the ownership. He is now director of CU News Corps, which produces student journalism at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Please join me in welcoming Chuck Plunkett to the podium. I'll take it. Congratulations.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me tonight and for being such good sports and honoring what we did from the Denver Post editorial. I'll try again. When he speaks, look out.
It's more dangerous.
Yeah. Thanks for helping us out at the Denver Post and supporting what we did, or what we've been trying to do. Thanks for standing up for quality local journalism over corporate greed. This award means so much because it comes from you, from my peers, from journalists, my heroes. Just getting to visit the National Press Club checks a top item on my bucket list. Thanks to the selection committee for elevating our cause. Thanks to all of you for advancing our profession every day of your dizzyingly complex lives. Because journalists overwhelmingly supported our Denver Rebellion, our News Matters perspective, our arguments were amplified in that magical way of our profession. I'll underscore the point. When we published online that snowy Friday afternoon, I was convinced it was the right thing to do. I was not as certain how it would be received. How could I be? Talk about uncharted territory. There was that inevitable moment of question, kind of like hitting the biggest jump you've ever tried on a snowboard. You wonder how you're going to land. Thankfully, the gnawing concern lasted only minutes. In no time at all, our barrage took off like a rocket, fueled so wonderfully by many of you. And so the man had to take notice. The apostates had to stand there and take it. The conversation rightly changed across the land, because we know all too well that what's happening in Colorado is happening in local newsrooms everywhere. Sure, there are complex market forces at work. We've navigated them for years. But making matters worse are predatory, cynical, small-minded owners who have no vision for the future, despite our steely commitment to embracing the opportunities provided by the latest technologies. These owners especially downgrade the mission of local journalists and poison the well. Our communities feel the loss of quality local journalism as a heartless betrayal. That insult to their very souls helps fuel the enemy of the people moniker and the antagonisms that present such a threat to our public debate, to democracy itself. And a new generation won't have reason to care about professional local news. A sad situation indeed. Ours is such a noble profession, but it's got such a bad rap these days. Worse, as the examples lived and died by my co-arts in the Obishan Award surely attest, it's a dangerous one. I lost my job for doing good journalism. Too many others have lost their freedom and their very lives. Yet each day, journalists all over the globe amaze with seemingly miraculous work. And sure, we're not perfect. We're all too human. But we do what we do right out in the open, cherishing transparency at every turn. And we don't stop trying until we get it right. Journalists bring us the truth, tell us the stories that matter, help communities find their voice and reach their fuller potential, keep folks accountable. Journalists help us deal with tragedies, shameful failures of the human spirit, cowardice and brutality. They bring us incredible stories about selfless acts of compassion and love. They enable justice, celebrate the heroic in us, the courageous and wise. They challenge us to think for ourselves and give us the tools to demand better. They provide the information we need to make sense of our lives and understand each other. We need owners who understand the importance of our mission and who support it as if the health of our communities and nation depends on it, because it does. Yes, other problems confront us and add to the bad rap. We ought to stand up more often and more vigorously to those willing to give in to the temptations of partisan echo chamber outlets and biased reporting. But that's another subject for another day. Thank you for this wonderful gift, and please accept my return compliment. In all my adult life, what I've consistently most wanted was to be like you all. I wanted to be known as a good, solid journalist and writer, one who plays by the profession's rules and abides by its ethics, to live up to the example so many of you provide. Every time I get to call myself a journalist, it makes me proud. Thank you for all you do.
Chuck. Congratulations.
Oh, look at this. It's so nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. I think everybody appreciated your words. Now we have a change of subject. This has been a particularly challenging year for all of us at the Press Club and the Journalism Institute because of the sudden and heartbreaking passing of our own beloved Julie Schoo this past May. Julie was the executive director of the Journalism Institute, and for 35 years she blessed the club, the Institute, and all of us with her intelligence, quick wit, compassion, and grace. We all miss her so much and want to offer a very warm welcome to her children, Carter and Gretchen, who are here with us tonight. One of the Institute's activities that was very close to Julie's heart was our scholarship program. Each year, the Institute awards 3 scholarships. This year's winners are Bianca Fortis of Brooklyn, New York, attending Columbia University, Corey Johnson of Wauseon, Ohio, attending the University of Missouri, and Tony Madden of Battlefield, Missouri, also attending the University of Missouri. And I swear I had nothing to do with the judging. The students received their scholarships at the Press Club's awards dinner last August. So tonight, it's my honor to announce that in recognition of Julie's remarkable contributions to this organization, the Board of Directors of the Journalism Institute has designated one of its scholarships as the National Press Club Sponsorship for Diversity in honor of Julie Schoo. This lasting memorial pays tribute to Julie's commitment to fairness, equity, and inclusion, to her warm heart and generous spirit, and to her gift for opening doors and forging links among all who had the good fortune to cross paths with her. It is our way of saying thank you and preserving the legacy of the wonderful person who laid the foundation for the Institute's important work now and well into the future. And now I'll turn the podium back over to Andrea.
Barbara, thank you, and thank you especially for your beautiful words about Julie, whom we all loved so much. She did so much good work here at the club. And we are so proud of all of the good work being done by the National Press Club Journalism Institute, which strives to illuminate barriers to press freedom in the US and abroad, and also works to leverage the National Press Club's unique presence and resources to highlight global press freedom issues. I'd like to take a moment to express our special thanks to and deep gratitude to tonight's sponsors, including Bloomberg News at the platinum level, at the gold level, Al Jazeera Media Network, NCTA, Reuters, The Washington Post, The New York Times. Also, silver sponsors, Toyota, Communications Consortium Media Center, Brown Capital Management, the Frank Islam and Debbie Dreisman Foundation, CNN, and the Craig Newmark Foundation. On the bronze sponsor level, ESPN, CFCO International, Adam Shapiro Public Relations, Syngenta, and the Barbara and John Cochran. Sorry, not a foundation, not yet. Might be at some point in the future, but not yet. So much of what we do here would not be possible without the generosity of our sponsors and donors. And as you can clearly see tonight, our work is more important than ever. Many of us here in this room today are guests of our very fine sponsors. So if those of you at the tables would like to join them in their support, now is a great time. We have created a text-to-give number to help continue the work of the National Press Club and the Journalism Institute. The number is on the screens up there. So text "Stand for Free Press" to 44321. Please feel free to give as much as you can and as often as you'd like. Our mission depends on your support. And now, please enjoy dinner. I'll be back a little bit later to introduce tonight's honorees. Thank you. Bon appetit. Before we begin our Fourth Estate Award presentations, it is my great pleasure to introduce a new award here at the National Press Club, the Neil and Susan Sheehan Prize for Investigative Reporting. This is named after the legendary New York Times reporter and his wife, Susan, who is herself a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and staff writer at The New Yorker. This award honors the Sheehans' extraordinary commitment to the principle that a vibrant democracy depends on an informed citizenry and a free press. It is particularly appropriate that we share this award with you tonight while we honor the New York Times and the Washington Post. Financial support for the Sheehan Prize is provided by an endowment from Ralph Krauss and Dr. Marianne Schulein, longtime friends of the Sheehans. I'd like to personally thank both of them. We are delighted that they were able to join us tonight. They're over here. If you can put your hands up so that people can see where you're sitting. There they are. There they are. As well as the Sheehan's daughters, Catherine Sheehan Bruno and Maria Sheehan, who are also right there. If you guys could put your hands up so we can see where you're sitting, please. Thank you. Thank you for being here. The very first winners of the Sheehan Prize are journalists whose investigative reporting brought about true cultural change in America by launching the Me Too movement. New York Times reporters Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey's Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation of sexual harassment charges against Harvey Weinstein and others has had an historic impact that continues to grow. We are delighted to award them the 2018 Sheehan Prize for Investigative Journalism. Jodi wasn't able to be here tonight. Please welcome Megan Twohey to the podium for their work of investigative journalism. Allow me to dedicate this award and with you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the National Press Club for this wonderful recognition. Jodi is not able to be here tonight. She had to stay home in New York so her journalist husband could meet a deadline, a sacrifice that Neil and Susan Sheehan would no doubt understand. It would be an honor to get this award under any circumstance, but to get it under the Sheehan's name makes it all the more special. Earlier today, I was trying to come up with an accurate tally of how many Pulitzer Prizes the couple has won between them. It was hard to keep track. And as female journalists who are constantly struggling to balance the demands of our jobs with the needs of our families, we draw much inspiration from the Sheehan's union, from their remarkable collaborations, from their mutual professional support that they have provided to each other year after year. But it goes beyond the tremendous journalism that the Sheehans have accomplished. Every time I land in the office of David McCraw, the attorney for the New York Times, in need of backing on a controversial investigative story, I'm reminded of all the legal battles that have been waged so that we can publish those stories. I think I speak for every journalist in this room when I say how indebted we are to those who fought so courageously and tirelessly to publish the Pentagon Papers, the Sheehans included. When we started the Harvey Weinstein investigation, we were well aware that many other journalists had tried and failed to do the story. Along the way, we were repeatedly told that we too would fail, that the powerful producer would march into the New York Times and use threats and intimidation to suppress the truth, that the editor or the publisher or the paper's attorneys would succumb to his bullying. Nothing could have been further from the truth. The Times' commitment to exposing sexual harassment was fierce, and it stretched back months before we made our very first phone call on Weinstein. In April 2017, our colleagues Emily Steele and Mike Schmidt, who's here tonight, broke an incredible story. They uncovered millions of dollars in payoffs that Bill O'Reilly had paid to silence women who accused him of sexual misconduct. The financial trail was stunning, and the public was outraged. So were Fox advertisers. And it was a key turning point. Not only was O'Reilly, perhaps the most powerful figure in conservative media, ousted from his job, the New York Times leadership quickly saw a need for a broader public service. Soon, journalists across our newsroom were fanning out to Ford plants and Silicon Valley and other industries to see if other powerful men had sexually harassed women and then covered up the violations. As Jody and I dove deeper into our investigation of Weinstein, who was long rumored to be a sexual predator, we realized that we were facing serious challenges. There were the secret settlements that had been used to silence women. There were the powerful lawyers who pounced with legal threats anytime anyone started to piece things together. There were private investigators who were targeting not only our sources, but also us as journalists. And, Weinstein's victims and others were terrified to tell the truth about him, fearful that they would be the ones to suffer if they spoke out. But time and again, we assured them that yes, the Hollywood producer was powerful, but so was the New York Times. And we were coming to them with the support of the entire organization. Dean Baquet and Matt Purdy, working under unimaginable pressure in an astounding news year, made it clear exactly how we were to deal with Weinstein and other subjects of our investigation, firmly, fairly, and most of all, on the record. Rebecca Corbett, the investigations editor, was so deeply at one with the project that she stayed in the newsroom until 3 a.m. to worry about every single choice of word. The legal threats came as expected, but at every turn, David McCraw was there too, fiercely defending us. The investigation spanned the generational shift in leadership at the Times, and we are so grateful that both AG and his father had our backs every step of the way. In the end, the institution rose up behind us to confront bullies and protect the vulnerable. And in doing so, it helped create a safe platform for countless other victims to share their stories. And this award is also for them. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And now to tonight's, Megan, that was great. Really, phenomenal. Thank you. And now to tonight's Fourth Estate honorees, starting with the New York Times executive editor, Dean Baquet. He is a friend and a colleague to so many here. Dean serves in the highest ranked position at the Times newsroom and oversees the Times content in all of its various forms, which sounds, frankly, Herculean. They've certainly won a large number of Pulitzers during his time there. He has also served as the managing editor of the Times, and before that was bureau chief for their paper here in the paper here in Washington. He has also worked at the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the Times-Picayune in New Orleans. While at the Chicago Tribune, he was awarded a Pulitzer Prize in 1988 for investigative reporting on corruption in the Chicago City Council. Great prep for today's challenges in Washington. Our first tribute to Dean is from Elizabeth Buemiller, the bureau chief of the Times here in Washington. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you all for being here and all the Times people. You all know about the great and very public accomplishments of Dean. You've just heard them. The greatest editor in the history of the New York Times, the dozen Pulitzers I counted on his watch as executive editor, the biggest ever 1,400 member staff, our record high readership, his leadership of the Me Too stories, the Russia investigation, our climate coverage, the 18-month investigation into the Trump family finances, and much more. But I've been asked tonight to tell you what it's like to work for Dean. Dean gets so excited about stories, particularly about the Robert Mueller and the Russia investigation, that he loves nothing more than a good 7:30 a.m. Saturday conference call. This is a true story. It may have been a brutal week, but Dean is raring to go, ready to pull together any strands we may have left on the floor late Friday night. I've learned to pick up my iPhone on Saturday mornings with great trepidation, and I look, and yes, there it is. Before I've had my coffee, the dawn email from Dean. Let's have a conference call. What more could you want to start your weekend? Dean gets so excited about stories that the Times is broken that I am reliably told that he sometimes chest bumps other editors in New York. Dean tries very hard not to dictate, and we all appreciate that. What he does instead is say, now, you don't have to use these words. And of course you'll have to do the reporting. And I'm just making this up. And please use your own words. But what if the lead said this? I have a lead here, but I won't read it. Dean has been extremely generous to the Washington Bureau about adding new staff under the onslaught of Trump, as he often reminds me. So when you want to hire someone who's absolutely fantastic, who's willing to start yesterday, who's been beating us on big stories, and might actually make the jump from the Washington Post, Dean will ask, is this the absolute best person in the world we could hire for this job? Are you sure? The absolute best. Shouldn't we look further? So Dean is very attentive and likes to ask if you had a nice holiday and what did you do? The answer for me is, well, I watched 6 episodes of The Crown. What did Dean do? He read poetry. This is really true, and he reads fiction. Dean, who does not own a television set, reads fiction to relax. I heard a gasp. His wife, who's here, Dylan Landis, is a wonderful novelist. Dean understands, Dean understands narrative and storytelling like no one else. It's one of the reasons he's such a great editor of the Times. Which brings me to what it's also like working for Dean. I've never known an editor who has more respect for reporters and who really listens to them. Dean taught me that, and I try to model myself after that when I became an editor. Get all the reporters in a room, see what they've got. They know so much, they're the experts, and let the stories bubble up from them. I've never known an editor who can drive a story like Dean. That's after all what all those Saturday morning conference calls are about. Dean can push and push and push and say, let's go take a look at everything we know so far about what the Russians did to interfere in the 2016 election. The result, there's a lot of results. Most recently was the fantastic Plot to Subvert an Election by Scott Shane and Mark Mazzetti. Mazzetti's here now. I've never known an editor who was a better editor, who could get the big idea. Reporters who were too far submerged in their stories when he was Washington bureau chief would walk into his office and ask him, why am I writing this? And Dean would say, well, what do you got? And the reporters would say this and that and this, and then Dean would say instantly, well, here's your nut graph, and he was always right. I've never known an editor who was more inspiring than Dean. Dean is, in fact, the reason I wanted to become an editor myself after many, many years as a reporter. When he came back to the Times as Washington bureau chief, after editing the LA Times, he brought this great jolt of energy and excitement to the bureau. I quickly saw, as a reporter, how much pleasure, how much joy he got out of working with reporters and editors and making our stories better and just in setting the agenda. I also saw, and it continues to this day, what a big difference one person can make in the Bureau, at the Times, and really to our democracy. So thank you, Dean. And now, I'm honored to introduce our brilliant publisher, A.G. Sulzberger.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I was looking at the program a second ago, and I noticed that Dean has 2 people introducing him, and Marty has 1. And if I know Dean, he's wondering right now, is that because I'm twice as good? and if I know Marty, right now he's thinking, is that because I need half as much explanation? So, so I am also going to talk a little bit about what it's like to work with Dean. And for those of us who have labored by Dean's side, there are a few enduring images we have that are etched in our mind. It's him on election night in 2016, an oasis of calm in a newsroom frantically redrawing a front page to scrap the headline, Madam President, unmistakably ready for the biggest story in a generation. It's him commanding a conference room of reporters and editors, asking just the right question to probe deeper or move a reluctant source on the record. It's him leaning back in his chair with a rough draft of the next bombshell in his hand and a sparkle in his eye. And if you talk to any of the 1,400 journalists who work for Dean, they'll all say the same thing. There is nothing Dean loves more than a great story. Or as he memorably put it in the Showtime series The Fourth Estate, not exactly in keeping with the New York Times style book, a great fucking story. And that's not to say that this is a man devoid of passions. Dean is a doting father and husband. He's a lover of literature. He is perhaps the only person I've ever met who reads a novel a week and isn't paid to do so. And in an industry of schlubs, his sock game and his pocket square collection have made him no less than a fashion icon. But Dean at his core is a journalist. And from chasing leads at his hometown Times-Picayune to his Pulitzer-winning work exposing corruption at the Chicago Tribune to his uncompromising leadership at the LA Times and the New York Times, Dean's career has reflected an unyielding, unapologetic commitment to the craft and values of great journalism at every turn. And I used to think it was surprising that this old school guy with this old school pedigree ended up being the leader who transformed this tradition-bound newspaper into a vibrant and ambitious digital report, more ambitious than anything that came before it. And I'm pretty sure that this is, after all, a guy who still thinks podcasting is a type of fly fishing. And yet he oversaw the creation of the nation's most successful downloaded podcast, The Daily. But I've come to realize that it's actually that Dean was able to transform the Times because he appreciates that in this moment of unrelenting economic pressure and digital disruption, that the long-standing values that have guided our profession must continue to serve as our North Star: fairness, accuracy, independence. And that means maintaining a bedrock commitment to original, expert, on-the-ground journalism, and holding tight to the belief that journalism and reporting has the ability to make the world a better and more just place. That means reporting on child starvation from the front lines of Yemen. That means digging relentlessly into Silicon Valley's secrets. It means giving 3 reporters 18 months to paint the most comprehensive picture of the president's family's wealth. It means following a hunch that led to the bombshell investigations that helped spark the Me Too movement, for which Megan and Jody are honored here tonight. And I know that Dean is thrilled to also be honored alongside Marty Baron. Before Marty went on to lead the Miami Herald and the Boston Globe and now the Post, he was an editor at the Times, where he and Dean forged a close and enduring friendship. They're the 2 finest editors working in American journalism today, and their friendly rivalry is a good thing. And their friendly rivalry is a good thing for a country in need of more great journalism. And so on behalf of all my colleagues at the Times, I'm delighted to present this award to a visionary leader, a badass journalist, and one of the people I admire the most, Dean Baquet.
I can't tell you how nice it is to get an award like this in mid-career. It inspires me for the many years to come. Actually, it is inspiring to be here with people who make journalism great every day in the face of remarkable odds, who write and explain and craft and strive on deadline, from pulling together alerts to writing the takeouts that inspire movements. It really is an honor to share this with Marty, a great competitor, and an even better friend. His previous newspaper altered the Catholic Church in America, and his current one is doing powerful work on the dominant story of our era. He has listened to me gripe, talk through journalistic challenges, and share a delight for art for nearly 20 years. Many of my friends and his friends know this, but I should probably announce this now. We're retiring together. We've got so many awards together and given so many speeches together that we're incorporating, and we will be doing weddings, supermarket openings, and bar mitzvahs. We'll be putting up our price list later. It's humbling to be here also at a time when the Khashoggi family is being honored. He was an inspiration to all of us, and his murder challenges the morality and the journalism of our country. It is vital that we keep his story alive, that we ask hard questions, even as some choose to look the other way. I share any recognition I get with my partners, Joe, Kahn, Matt Purdy, Elizabeth Buemiller, the best Washington bureau chief in the history of the New York Times. Allison Mitchell, Rebecca Blumenstein, all of whom have made me look better, far better than I am, and A.G. Sulzberger, who I believe in my heart will stand as the most important media leader of his generation. I remember walking into a newsroom for the first time more than 40 years ago to the smell of cigarettes and the craziness of the characters. There was a police reporter named Walter who was so used to dictating his stories over the phone that even when he was in the newsroom, his editor made him call in his notes from his desk. That same reporter taught me that if you hang around long enough and listen, people will open up and tell you their stories. It was a first lesson for me in the fundamental core of being a journalist, winning and keeping trust both with sources and readers. In newsrooms, I learned the value of understanding and of empathy. Like everyone else, I made cringe-worthy mistakes in my first jobs. But I learned that the beauty of newspapers is that if you're honest and humble, you can come back the next day and get it right. Newspapers opened the world to me. In newsrooms, a kid whose parents didn't finish high school learned to talk sympathetically to crime victims, open-mindedly to cops, boldly to powerful politicians and rich people, and knowingly to the very people my father served as a mailman and my grandmother served as a maid. In newsrooms, I met Dylan Landis, who inexplicably told a 26-year-old man who dressed badly and smoked too much that he would one day be editor of the New York Times, who taught me to read literature and that there was truth and understanding and empathy embedded in those pages just as there was in newsprint. She's the best thing newspapers have given me. I'm a product of 5 newspapers. I believe in them, and I don't think anyone has come up with another way to do what they do. That is covering everything from the larger world to the local school board. Many, if not most of them, will die in the coming years. And that is a tragedy and a threat to democracy worth discussing for just a moment. I have no doubt that someone will come up with a business model for consistent coverage of Wall Street, of lobbying in Washington and Sacramento. There is money to be made in that mission. But who will cover the schools of Newark and New Orleans and the courts of the Bronx and Opelousas? The fine media analyst Ken Doctor has said that 2018 and 2019 are the years of reckoning in a crisis that has been building for a decade. He recently wrote about the San Jose Mercury News, which reported that it had lost 34% of its daily print subscribers over just 30 months and 19% of its Sunday subscribers. I'm not such a romantic that I believe newspapers are the only way to cover America, nor would I deny that some of the wounds have been self-inflicted. And I firmly believe that the digital era will stand as the golden age of American journalism when the dust settles. But I'd like for us to at least add urgency to the conversation about what we will do when there aren't any more local papers. I'm not worried about the Times and the Post. I believe those institutions have turned the corner and will last far, far into the future. I worry about just about everybody else and the people whose lives and governments will not get the scrutiny and the celebration that they deserve. I don't want to end without acknowledging the other battle, which is taking place here in Washington and in capitals around the world. This is our moment, through our work and our voices, to say proudly that we are actually the voices of the people. We have to avoid getting drawn into the deafening, often depressing cacophony that seems to pass for discourse. But we have to be assertive that we engage in the world of truth, and that those who say otherwise are simply trying to undermine the independence, trust, and authority that we have built up over generations. We owe that to our profession, to the people who came before us, to history, and to journalists like Jamal Khashoggi and many others who have died doing something simple and noble, telling the truth. Thank you.
Dean, thank you. Thank you. Next, we have Marty Baron, who became executive editor for the Washington Post 5 years ago. Like Dean, he oversees the Post's print and digital operations, and yes, just about everything, including 6 Pulitzer Prizes while he's been at the helm. Marty came to the Post after 11 years at the Boston Globe, where the investigative team series about the concealment of sex abuse in the Catholic Church was recently portrayed in the Academy Award-winning movie Spotlight. Marty was played by Liev Schreiber. He has also held top editing positions at the New York Times, the LA Times, and the Miami Herald. Marty is a member here at the National Press Club and has also served on the board of the National Press Club Journalism Institute. So thank you, Marty, for serving. His profile, like that of his co-honoree, has risen greatly during the administration of Donald Trump as the press has come under increasingly frequent attack. His response to that has become a motto for these times. We're not at war, we're at work. Please turn your attention to these screens to learn more about the Washington Post's Marty Baron.
When I think of Marty, I think of fearless and focused.
Inspirational and uncompromising.
Principled and savvy. Swagger and leader.
Hungry and generous.
Martin Baron attended Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. As a freshman, he began writing for the student newspaper, the Brown and White. By his junior year, he was editor-in-chief. For 3 summers while in college, Marty interned at the Tampa Tribune. He graduated in 1976 and began his journalism career at the Miami Herald. After 3 years, he moved to the Los Angeles Times, where he became business editor, assistant managing editor, and editor of the newspaper's Orange County edition.
In my 17 years at the Los Angeles Times, far longer than I've worked anywhere else, I was able to learn from some of the world's best journalists and to make friends for life.
From there, Marty joined the New York Times, where he became associate managing editor overseeing nighttime operations. In 2000, Marty returned to the Miami Herald as executive editor. Under his leadership, the Herald won the Pulitzer Prize for breaking news coverage of the raid to recover Elian Gonzalez, the Cuban boy at the center of a fierce immigration and custody dispute. Marty went on to be named editor of the Boston Globe. While editor, his staff would earn 6 Pulitzer Prizes, including the Public Service Award for exposing the cover-up of clergy sexual abuse inside the Catholic Church. Actor Liev Schreiber portrayed Marty in Spotlight, the Oscar-winning movie about that investigation into the church.
I think people are always generally excited to talk to an actor who's about to play them, I think.
I guess they have a chance, too, to try to, politic and make sure you do it in a way that makes them seem cooler.
I think Marty Baron was probably the exception to that rule.
Oh, right, sure,
I took a train down to meet Marty Baron, who I am a huge fan of as an editor. I'm a great admirer of his, and I don't think there could have been 2 more nervous guys in a room.
Right.
Me and Marty Baron talking to each other. He's not someone who I think really is interested in his own story.
Well, yeah, I would imagine because he's so much on the side of the news that presents it, that it strikes me as he's someone who believes the more invisible he is, the better the news
better
story.
he is at doing his job.
Yeah.
We need to focus on the institution, not the individual priests. Practice and policy. Show me the church manipulated the system so that these guys wouldn't have to face charges. Show me they put those same priests back into parishes time and time again. Show me this was systemic, that it came from the top down. We're going after the system. Every once in a while, you play these characters where you are attributed with a certain level of intellect and ability that then, when you go out into the real world, people think you actually have. And it's happened to me twice, once with Hamlet and a second time with Marty Baron. So I was very proud.
Marty spent nearly a dozen years at the Globe before he was hired as executive editor of the Washington Post on January 2nd, 2013. Today, Marty oversees a staff of more than 800 journalists. Some of our Post colleagues wanted to share a few words.
Everyone sees the world-changing work the Washington Post produces every day, but what they don't see is the compassion and thoughtfulness that Marty uses to lead the newsroom every day.
He is guided by principles that are unflagging. And so if Marty Baron said to me, walk through a plate glass window, I would do it because I know that Marty would never ask me to do anything that was wrong. And I think there are lots of people in this newsroom who would walk through plate glass windows for Marty Baron.
He's very mission-oriented, and I think you can see that in the journalism that we produce at the Post. Very much a tribute to him and the way he thinks about journalism in today's world.
The thing that I really like about Marty is that he leads the newsroom through expectation, right? That Marty expects us to ask hard questions, to drill in and get important details, and above all, to write good stories.
The cool thing about working for Marty is that you never have to guess what he wants. He wants more and better and smarter and tougher, and he wants all of that now. But to get there, he gives us whatever tools we need to do our best work, and that includes the freedom to reimagine that work entirely. So Marty both expands and enables our ambitions.
The Post newsroom is not alone in recognizing Marty as a leading voice in real journalism for the entire industry.
Go out every day and find out what the facts are. Freedom of the press in this country is more fragile than any of us might have imagined. Journalistic independence is not a hostile act. It is a moral duty. We're not at war with the administration. We're at work, okay? We're doing our jobs as the press and what we're expected to do.
The Washington Post newsroom is fortunate to have a fearless leader in Marty Baron. I'm proud to call him my colleague and my friend. He leads a formidable team, one that is relentless in pursuit of the truth, produces unparalleled journalism, and is an innovator in news technology. While he's at the forefront of this rapidly changing model of journalism, Marty is committed to upholding the highest standards and values of our profession. When you walk by Marty's office, you see his glass wall that's covered with letters from readers. One that caught my eye reads, "Thank you for your undaunted courage and persistent resolve to report the news as it actually happens." I want to echo that gratitude. On behalf of everyone at the Washington Post, we congratulate Marty on this well-deserved honor. Cheers, Marty.
Hi, Marty. That was great. Here to pay additional tribute to Marty Baron is Robbie Robinson, editor-at-large of the Boston Globe.
Thank you. You know, Marty, I'm taken aback at all the accolades that have been showered on your competitor. And nobody told me I was supposed to say anything nice about you. I mean, you know damn well I would not walk through a plate glass window. Anyway. A month ago, Bill McCarran called to ask if I'd come down for this event. He wondered if I'd focus on the funny side of Marty. The silence was so prolonged that Bill thought it was a dropped phone call. I finally said, "Has he become funny?" From what I've detected so far tonight, the answer could be yes, but compared only to Dean. This has been a daunting assignment. I searched my memory for Marty humor. Nada. I sought out colleagues here and in Boston. What did I get? Blank stares, a few incredulous guffaws, of incredulity. Finally, I turned to my friends Tom and Lisa Redburn, whom I know through Marty, and they have known Marty since 1979. So Tom and I were playing golf earlier this month when I first asked him about the humorous side of Marty. He started to shake, and then he promptly missed a 1-foot putt. I followed up with emails to Tom and Lisa. Please, I wrote, I need some funny Marty anecdotes. No response. I left voicemails. No callbacks. They're neighbors. So I went over and I rang their bell. No one answered. I looked in the front window. The furniture was gone. You get the picture. Now, to those video testimonials you have just seen, please pay them no attention. They're from people who owe Marty their jobs, their future, their promotions, their front page bylines, their pensions. They're even beholden to him for Whole Foods romaine lettuce that doesn't have E. coli. I owe Marty Baron nothing. So believe me, not them. Marty left the Globe 6 years ago in January. But he valued so many Globe reporters that he continued to oversee their work. How is that possible? He hired them all. Lots of them. This is one area of competition between the Times and Post where Marty has beaten Dean like a rented mule. You think I'm kidding? Recently, he hired away our Washington bureau chief, Chris Rowland, and reporter Matt Visor. 3 weeks ago, I saw Annie Linsky, the deputy bureau chief, in the Globe newsroom. Ha, I said to her, you must be here so Brian can name you the bureau chief. She hemmed and hawed, and she said, well, actually, I'm here to tell Brian I'm going to the Post. So in 2015, picture this, the Globe's DC bureau was 5, Rowland, Visor, Linsky, Mike Kranish, and Tracy Jan. All 5 now work for the Post. I'm shocked. One takeaway from tonight's Post videos is that Marty is the planet's best editor. That is bullshit. If you like potato chips, you don't buy them one at a time. You buy the whole bag. How about running that up the flagpole in Seattle? You could get the rest of us. I flew down just for a quick overnight, but just in case, Marty, I booked a room at a chain called Extended Stay America. Marty and I own a few pairs of muddy boots from having slogged through a few swamps together. One of those was the damn Spotlight film. I say that because it's left us mutually cursed. People who do not know us think we're carbon copies of the actors who portrayed us. For 3 years now, we've been asked whether the film was accurate. It was a dramatization, of course, but one that faithfully captured much of what we did and the arc of our investigation. Director Tom McCarthy managed to distill 5 months of our work into 2 hours and 8 minutes. There are editors everywhere who would love to be able to do that with the time their reporters spend on stories. but it's as close a film as Hollywood can get to the truth. But the film has its flaws, and I have to tell you that most of them have to do with the way Marty was portrayed. There is, for an example, an early scene where my doppelganger, Michael Keaton, has a luncheon meeting with Marty's character, Liev, whom you've just met. In the film, the discussion is about the Spotlight team. In real life, it was about Marty's confusion about baseball. Like, you know, how is it played? He thought, he may still think, that being on first base is better than being on third base. Like it's an Olympic medal. Like a triple only gets you a bronze medal, but a single gets you the gold. His naivete, believe me, about baseball is inspiring. So he said to me in that meeting, "What are the chances the Red Sox will ever make the Super Bowl?" Not for me to bullshit the new boss. No chance at all, I told him. All of which is why, 11 years later, I was happy Marty took a job in a city that, practically speaking, doesn't have a real baseball team. And that's not all. Thanks to the film, Marty is a legend in American journalism, partly for his alleged gutsy decision on his first day as editor to have Spotlight investigate the Catholic Church. It didn't happen that way. Marty summoned Ben Bradley Jr., young Ben as we call him, although young Ben has just turned 70. He summoned young Ben and myself to his office that afternoon. Here's what he really said to us. "I'd like Spotlight to investigate the Catholic priests, but the blowback could be a problem for us. So let's do the rabbis first." Ben and I talked him out of it. And I don't have time to go into Ben's initial effort at compromise by trying to get him to sign on to the Anglicans. In the film in real life, no, I think I'll skip that one. Okay. Enough of that. Time to move from my alternative facts about Marty to the real Marty Baron. He so deserves this honor, certainly more than any other past recipient of an honorary degree from Lehigh. That's an inside joke unless you read the Post. Obviously, nobody at the Times table does because I heard no one. I'm not here to talk about what Marty's done at the Post or for the quality of American journalism. Most of you know that story all too well. I want to talk about Marty and Boston, where he's had his longest stint as a top editor. Some people think, wrongly, that Marty has little personality, that he brings no emotion to his work, that he's remote and uncaring, socially awkward. Need I go on? In fact, he is an intimidating presence, especially to editors and reporters who haven't quite met the extraordinarily high standards he sets for himself and for those who work for him. Not long after Marty came to Boston, his editorship was anonymously described in the Boston Phoenix by one of our reporters as, quote, "the joyless pursuit of excellence," close quote. To which one of my colleagues said at the time, "What, we should prefer the joyful pursuit of mediocrity?" Marty, to be sure, was an upsetting force in our newsroom, but one that was long overdue. He was the first Globe editor ever who came from outside. A fresh pair of eyes that on his first day at the Globe helped him see a potential story which reverberates around this world today and will for decades to come. When I watch the Post videos, I'm struck by the tone of respect and affection for Marty. From a staff he is leading through a period of upsizing, I ask you this: who wouldn't love the editor in such an environment? It might surprise you to know that when Marty presided over a substantial downsizing at the Globe, the affection and respect for him was just as palpable. Why is that? Marty put to use his substantial intelligence and business skills to minimize the damage to the Globe's journalism. But it wasn't just about the journalism. He cared as much or more about the people. He moved pieces on that chessboard with such skill that he saved jobs that anywhere else would have been lost. He turned cuts that could have been layoffs into buyouts. I'd be surprised if there was an editor at any major metro daily who blunted the impact of downsizing with the skill Marty did. For Marty, it's always been about the journalism, and thank God for that. He brings so much to any table. He forgets nothing. He's forever seeing possibilities that good editors and reporters have overlooked. He can make a good story great on deadline. We spent weeks writing the very first story we did on the church. It was well and carefully written and rewritten and rigorously edited. Only then did I send this 5,000-word main story to Marty. Less than 2 hours later, it came back to me with several major editing suggestions, not a one I could disagree with. I sent him back an email, "What took you so long?" One thing I learned quickly about him: you put yourself on the line for Marty, he stands there right beside you. He is fiercely demanding of his staff, but equally protective of those who work for him. And he's famously never off duty. It's a given that a late night or weekend email to Marty will almost always get an immediate response. This, I understand, remains his MO, according to my best anonymous source at the Post. Thank you, Tracy Grant. Knowing Marty, I wouldn't be surprised if I get an email in the morning, hell, maybe even before midnight, with suggested edits to the remarks I am about to conclude. Do not for a moment think that Marty is one-dimensional. He's no life of the party, but he accumulates and keeps friends in numbers that would be the envy of most any of us. He's good to great company, and every now and then, the heart appears on the sleeve. 3 years ago, along with 2,400 other people, we saw Spotlight for the first time on the big screen at the Toronto Film Festival. It was, to put it mildly, an emotional moment for us. As it ended, we were escorted backstage before being introduced to the audience. Among us, Marty was the most verklempt. Should I repeat that? I gave him a hug, not just to comfort him, but for all that he had done against tough odds for the Globe and the quality of journalism in Boston. I was rummaging around in Nexus last night, trying to find the date Marty's move to Washington was announced. I stumbled upon Steve Muffson's story, but had forgotten he had interviewed me. Here is what he quoted me as saying in 2012. I think it would be hard to argue that there is a better newspaper editor around. Marty, I owe you an apology for that. that was an understatement then. It is a much greater understatement now. Thank you.
And now, tonight's other fourth estate awardee, Marty Baron.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, don't count on me to be funny. First of all, thank you for this great honor. It's especially gratifying to be recognized by this particular institution. The National Press Club has been a forceful, unwavering advocate on behalf of press freedoms, brave journalism, the safety of journalists, and high journalistic standards. Thank you for that work. Thank you as well to Fred Ryan, who had to rush off to an event, family event, and to Robbie for their gracious introductions. I'll get to Robbie in a second. Fred has been steadfast in his support for our newsroom, providing the resources and encouragement needed to fulfill our highest aspirations. In speaking out about Jamal Khashoggi, he has been a clear voice of conscience on behalf of free expression, truth-telling, human rights, and basic humanity. And Walter Robinson, the great Walter Robinson. And the funny Walter Robinson. The luckiest thing about my going to Boston in 2001 was getting to work with Robbie, one of the world's greatest investigative journalists. His instinct for a story, his savvy about how to pursue it, his persistence, and his moral compass define the soul and spirit of journalism. Because of his dogged pursuit of truth as editor of the Spotlight team, the Globe documented the decades-long cover-up of clergy sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. That investigation was emblematic of Robbie's long career uncovering wrongdoing by the powerful in defense of the powerless. And so, as a result, I have finally, grudgingly accepted that Michael Keaton had a bigger speaking role than Liev Schreiber. My former publisher at the Miami Herald, Alberto Ibargüen, was supposed to be here as well. Illness got in his way, but I want to acknowledge him. Now CEO of the Knight Foundation, Alberto has marshaled its resources on behalf of fact-based journalism and to promote digital progress for our profession. He was my boss when the Miami Herald covered the case of Elian Gonzalez, and when we undertook our own count of Florida votes in the 2000 presidential election after the US Supreme Court prohibited an official recount. Alberto safeguarded the independence of our journalism amid boiling community tensions. I owe him a ton. He took a risk in giving me my first top editor job, and I wish him a fast recovery. I'm incredibly grateful to be joined by colleagues from the Washington Post who are at two tables here. Going to work at the Post is a source of daily inspiration. You can be sure democracy will not die in darkness with the Washington Post around. I was proud to be selected as executive editor 6 years ago, and every day makes me prouder still, as we strive to live up to our organization's first principle, written in 1935, to tell the truth as nearly as the truth may be ascertained. When I had to select a career in 1976, I wanted to do something both meaningful and interesting, and I have never regretted my choice. Journalism can influence ordinary people's lives for the better. It is essential to democracy, and it is never boring. And I can think of no more rewarding calling than to be a journalist in these times. Finally, it is wonderful to share this year's award with Dean Baquet, my good friend, and as you all know and all heard, an exceptional journalist. Dean and I became colleagues in 1996 when I joined the New York Times. And over the years, as we were asked to lead news organizations, we could count on each other's counsel when there was really no one else to confide in. So Dean and I became each other's therapists. His advice is sound, and the price is right. When he and I are done talking, we resume competing, each with the same goal: ambitious journalism that makes a difference. And not to be dismissed, bragging rights. I became an editor in 1983 at the Los Angeles Times. In short order, I was appointed business editor, and my boss drafted an announcement. He included my age, which he put down as 30. I had to tell him I was 29, and you could see the sinking feeling. From such mistakes, careers are made. Truth is, I was inexperienced, and it showed. In the early months, I was lost as to what it meant to be a manager, to lead a staff. As a reporter, I had known what was expected of me: report the hell out of a story, write it as well as I could, get it in on deadline, try to get along with my editors. I knew what I had achieved. The byline was proof I had done it. When I became an editor, I was denied that clarity. I was exhausted at the end of the day, but I could scarcely remember what I had done. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. So I picked up the only management book I've ever read outside of college, and the book was written by Peter Drucker, a renowned professor and guru of sorts. And because it helped, I'd like to mention some of what he had to say, because it is held true. The test of an organization, he wrote, is to bring out whatever strengths there is in its members, and to use each individual's strength to help all the other members perform. I see that every day. We each come to work with our individual strengths. Working together, we accomplish more than any one of us could alone. We at the Post are blessed with brilliant staffers, but there is no one who does not rely on others to succeed. That is true for me as much or more than anyone. Whatever is considered an achievement of mine is the direct result of what others have accomplished, and their achievements depend in turn on the invaluable contributions of their fellow journalists. What I have sought to do is ensure that my newsroom colleagues are given the very best opportunity to do their very best work, that collectively we are moving in the right direction, adhering to high standards, making optimal use of our skills, always serving readers and the public interest first. Drucker also wrote that the focus of an organization must be on opportunities rather than on problems. You know, I got into journalism when it was a bad year for the business, 1976, a big recession. And it has been a bad year most years since. Yet here we are. I made a whole career out of it. And despite our blunders, we as a profession are continuing to fight. That is because our profession is needed. So we owe it to our profession and to the public to be optimists. No one has ever succeeded by expecting failure. We must be resourceful and enterprising enough to seize the opportunities before us, forever faithful to our values but always open to new ways of communicating them. Finally, Drucker identified what he saw as the most important quality in those asked to lead others. Integrity, he wrote, is one absolute requirement of a manager, the one quality that he has to bring with him and cannot be expected to acquire later on. And apologies for the gender bias in that language. He was of a different generation. No one, he said, should have a vision that focuses on people's weaknesses rather than on their strengths. No one should be more interested in the question of who is right than in the question of what is right. Leadership, he wrote, is lifting people to higher heights and a higher standard. Across my 35 years as an editor, I have tried, imperfectly for sure, to work by those principles and practices. I hope that over time, I have gotten better at it, giving the abundant talents of my fellow journalists every chance to flourish. At the very heart of integrity for a journalist must also be a firm commitment to the spirit of the First Amendment and to the founders' conviction that the press is needed to hold government to account. Another quality is essential too, and it was articulated perfectly by the late New York Times columnist Anthony Lewis. The American press, he wrote, has been given extraordinary freedom by the Supreme Court's interpretation of the First Amendment. In return, it owes society courage. Just telling the truth, fairly, honestly, honorably, but also unflinchingly, can often be the most courageous act of all. In too many countries, it will get you killed. I mentioned earlier the first principle of the Post, which applies regardless of who holds power, to tell the truth as nearly as the truth may be ascertained. That suggests that getting at the truth is a process of striving. Truth can be elusive. But that principle also holds that there is such a thing as truth, that it is not just a matter of opinion, or who has the loudest megaphone, or who commands the most power. History teaches that we cannot always rely on our leaders to safeguard free expression in the cause of truth. At times, they have failed miserably. The Sedition Act of 1798 under President John Adams, Sedition and Espionage Acts under Woodrow Wilson, the McCarthy era. Today, we face another threat, arguably more pernicious. This one is to the very concept of truth itself. An assault on our profession, led by the president, has gone on now for years. It began as a campaign first to marginalize the press, then to delegitimize it, then to demonize us, then to dehumanize us. Then came enemies of the people. At work here is an effort to disqualify the press as an independent arbiter of fact. But it does not stop there. Other institutions and professions are to be disqualified as well. The courts, law enforcement, intelligence agencies, even scientists. Meantime, the information ecosystem is awash in deceit and baseless conspiracy theories, many endorsed or invented by the president himself. The goal is evident, and it is cynical. Obliterate the very idea of objective truth. If we come to feel the truth is unknowable, mission accomplished. People just believe what they would like to believe. If we conclude that everyone is lying for selfish reasons, mission accomplished as well. Then it doesn't matter if our leaders are being untruthful, as long as they serve our individual interests. If we now believe truth can only come from the head of state, then we have surrendered the foundational idea of America. At the Post, At the Post, we are determined to give the public the information it needs and deserves to know. That means, above all, holding politicians, policymakers, and other powerful individuals and institutions to account. That is our job, and we will do it. With this award, you honor not only me, but also my colleagues at the Washington Post, whose work is daily testament to that mission. You also honor my former colleagues at the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, Miami Herald, and Boston Globe, who maintain the same fervent sense of purpose. I am here today because of all those remarkable people. They gave me strength. They gave me inspiration. They have my deepest thanks, as do all of you for having me here tonight. Thank you.
Marty, congratulations and thank you. Thank you to both of our phenomenal, amazing honorees. I can't say how honored I am to give both of you this award here tonight. Thank you so much for being here together and accepting it. These are two exemplary men and journalists. Thank you for being here. Thanks. Dean, please join us for a final photo, as well as I have something more for both of you. These are your lifetime membership cards to the National Press Club.
You don't have to pay a membership for that?
You don't have to pay membership anymore. Congratulations. Thank you. Let's take one more photo. Yes. Well, we want more photos. We're not quite done. We're going to take one more photo. And then I have some amazing, excellent news for you that made my jaw drop. Where would you like?
If you guys want to grab your awards and just take them up and Andrea, if you would get them.
I don't know that that's excellent news, but.
Marty, you want to grab yours? It's right there. Yeah.
What do we do? Okay, this is pretty
Yeah.
right here.
Thank you.
That is excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you very much.
Audience, thank you for your patience with that. So, congratulations again to our Fourth Estate Award honorees and all of tonight's award recipients. Before we retire to the Holman Lounge right next door for after-dinner drinks, I need to say a few final words. One, thank you for your donations. You can continue to give throughout the night. Tonight, we have raised a total for tonight's dinner of more than $131,000, which is a record for the Fourth Estate Awards dinner. Thank you. It's a record. And all of this goes to support the National Press Club's Journalism Institute, which does such good work for press freedom, professional development, scholarships. Great job. I'm so excited. Barbara, I saw the amount and I said, is that right? Anyhow, it is. This evening's event would not be possible without the hard work of some very, very special people. In particular, I'd like to thank the National Press Club and National Press Club Journalism Institute staff. In particular, our executive director, Bill McCarran, who makes this event a priority every year. And finally, a word of thanks to all of our members who attended tonight's dinner. You are the club. You are what makes it such a special place, and I am so happy to see so many of you here tonight. It's been a great evening. It's not over yet. Please join us next door in the Holman Lounge for a nightcap. Thank you all, and good night.